I think we have to maybe clarify a few things that I have been noticing that in the kind of spiritual world these days is either misinterpreted or maybe not completely seen. So what we're dealing with is very simple. As we're here, prior to the body, prior to our thinking, prior to the feelings, prior to the experience of now, there's awareness here. That's who we are. That is unchangeable. It doesn't come, it doesn't go, it is just here and notices whatever shows up in itself. At the very same time, we cannot deny that in this very moment there's an experience showing up in that awareness that we are. That experience is, if you really precisely look what it is a sensation in our nervous system. So experience is not belonging to consciousness, it belongs to actually to the manifest world, it belongs to the body. You and me, we do not experience anything as consciousness. That which is experiencing this moment is, some scientists say it's about 80 trillion cells being organized in a certain way, and I don't know the complexity of this whole scenario. But in this moment, every cell, every neuron, every muscle, every tissue, every organ is somehow already included in producing that experience. Without the body, there is no experience of life. There's consciousness. And what I have seen over the years is that in the spiritual world, and especially in this new approach of non-duality, how it is brought to the West from India, the experience of the body, which is the actual experience of life, is very often either not fully included or it is watched from the outside in, from like a kind of witness perspective. So the effect is that we are not fully embodied, that consciousness hasn't found a way to fully return into the human form. In a metaphorical way, we could say God has not completely descended into the human form so he could enjoy himself through the human form. When this is not happening, we cannot be present, because what happens is that that it feels like that consciousness is disembodied. It is somehow looking at life from a kind of, I used to call it from the outside in, instead of experiencing life from the inside out with the entire body. So as we're sitting here, so we can either look at each other with our senses, trying to reach out and trying to make connection. But what happens as a matter of fact is that we're already experiencing each other inside, because I can feel you. And if we take a moment, you can feel me. It's not even me as a person, it is that our bodies feel each other. And even in the scientific world, they have found recently, it's not so long ago, a few years ago, they found a cell in the human system, they call them mirror neurons. Maybe you have heard about this. And their only function is that they can mirror the nervous system of the being in front of us and reflects it back into our own nervous system so that we can actually feel someone else as our own experience. So as long as this is either not seen, or we're not aware of it, or we are using knowing about consciousness as a kind of withdraw from the experience of now, our capacity to stay present in the body amidst the experience of now is limited. And for most of us is then when discomfort shows up, when we, specifically when we go in contact with other human beings, things are touched in our system that are so deeply rooted in the cells that without even noticing, our system backs off. It's like a reflex. It's nothing we do, there's no conscious decision involved, there's not even a sense of me involved, but all what we see, it's like a leap, and we disembody and we trying to find a place of safety so that we feel secure and safe with each other. So eventually it comes down that we never found a way to be safe with each other. The nervous system is not safe with itself, It hasn't found a way to be present with itself, and to the degree it has not been integrated with itself, like met itself, I cannot be present with you, and I cannot be present with anything. So presence is not only knowing and being consciousness, but it is inevitably depend on how much we can fully embody. So, can I be present in my body with you? So as we're here, we feel each other. It's like how my body meets your body. And I can only do this to the degree I feel comfortable. I feel familiar with this. And on that descent of consciousness into the human body, there are layers met, or we meet layers that most of us are completely unconscious. We may know about them intellectually, like psychologically, but we have never fully experienced what we're actually dealing with. And that can be quite scary. And so, to the degree I have been exploring this, knowing about consciousness, that you know, like waking up to that reality, is only the very beginning. It is the absolute beginning of like building up a different kind of relationship with the human system. And in building up a different relationship with that human system, there's no other way that I build up another relationship, a different relationship with all of life. Because this human body eventually is everybody. And that's what is a little bit confused. Why? And that's maybe an information that has been very valuable for me, because I also was very much influenced by the Indian tradition. You know, Advaita, non-duality, originally comes from India. And to understand that the Indian culture, and I have spent many, many years there, is a culture where the body is considered as being dirty, rotten. That's also why India looks like a big rotten body, because there is not much awareness there. So the traditional Advaita teaching, non-dual teaching, is culturally and historically denying the body. And I've seen that to export that philosophy straight into the West is not all the way healthy, because it invites a misunderstanding that as we are not the body, it doesn't mean that we don't have a body. There is still a body here. We cannot deny this. So even if the scientists say this is energy and molecules vibrating and all the rest of it, it's true. But it doesn't change the fact that the body is still experiencing this moment. That we cannot deny. And there's a little bit of confusion I see, and it's, I think, quite valuable to actually clarify this. And that's where embodied presence actually starts. This can be heard like this, but eventually it's not a doing, because as a matter of fact, when we just look at it now, there's awareness here. And it's funny enough, it needs more effort to deny and to push that body away than just if the focus of our attention just relaxes for one moment. Okay, so if we speak about embodiment, what we actually eventually speak about is that the focus of our attention starts to relax. So there's awareness here, and in that awareness there are different focuses of attention. And to the very focus, to the way of how our attention functions, we either exclude certain aspects, and when the focus is relaxed and wide, there's more inclusion. So as we have never learned to let the focus relax, we are so used to hold our focus tight. Even taking the focus and shifting it 180 degrees towards consciousness, which is invited by some teachers, you know. They say, you only have to focus on consciousness, that's it. But that is effort. Because if you don't do this, you will see that the focus of attention moves quite naturally. It moves in, it moves out, it wants to move all the way. And through willpower, through effort, we're trying to take that focus, that capacity to focus, which is a human capacity, to direct it somewhere. But if you would let go of this, the focus will do its own thing. And what's interesting is to explore what is actually the energy that drives the focus to constantly move. And if we really look at it, we will see what's the energy that drives our focus not to rest and to relax. Like the Buddhists, they would call it loose and natural, which is in itself a natural inclusive focus. What drives the focus is unconscious stress in our nervous system. Tension, fear, panic, disintegration. And to the degree we have not fully released and discharged that energy in our nervous system, it activates our system and it drives the focus into all kinds of funny directions. So trying to focus all the time on consciousness, which is suggested by some teachers, which I understand completely because ultimately it's true. But practically, it's not what's happening all the time because you have to do it all the time. So in meeting the body and discharging these kind of layers of dysfunctional behavior, which is caused by stress and anxiety, the system starts to naturally rest. It finds a way of feeling completely at ease with itself. It's not that I am at ease with the system, but the body seems to meet itself, it seems to reassociate with its own wiring, and to that degree, Western terms would be to the degree it is integrated, the system just can relax, let it go, let the focus relax, and in that focus you will see, if you just play with it, the body is automatically included. But if you go to India, it is so historically and culturally obscure to be in the body that if you touch someone, even they are so fragile because there's so much anxiety to be physical, for example. So it's quite tricky to play with this. I think it's good to understand the tradition of a non-duality in a wider context. If we speak about happiness and anxiety, these are experiences, these are psychological labels first. Okay? So ultimately they don't exist. All what we're speaking about is a certain organization of the nervous system, in the tissue, in the muscles. So opening up, we would experience as happiness on the very surface of the human experience, and a contraction, we would experience as anxiety. If we remove the labels, the psychological labels, the human labels, we're dealing with this and with that. Okay, so what drives that? And what I've been noticing is there's something that we, in this kind of approach, has never been really addressed, which is that our human nervous system demands, it needs it like the air to breathe, it needs to feel safe. If we don't feel safe, if this body doesn't feel safe, it cannot open up. So if we want to have an experience of oneness, now I'm speaking not about non-duality, which is in its essence oneness, to have an experience of oneness. What means oneness? That I'm experiencing you as my own self. That I feel everything as my own self. That between that body and that body there is no difference. That we are one. But that means we have to be open towards each other. So but our nervous system can only open towards each other when we feel safe. And people don't pay attention to this. They try to open up, but there is no environment of safety. What does it mean, safety? Safety means we can let each other be. I can just let you be. I can let myself be. I can just be the space for whatever experience is there. And to that degree, there is no preference. But it is still completely experienced by the body. Because as long as the body doesn't feel safe, it will make you have preferences. It's not that you having preferences, it will make it because it contracts, and the natural functioning of the system that it wants to complete itself, it wants to reunite, it wants to become one. It, like in the Christian tradition, they would have say, become like a child again. You know, if you look at children, they don't have that. They're just one. So the nervous system has a built-in mechanism trying to complete itself. It tries to find its own association. But as we mostly grew up in an environment and many people underwent dramatic, painful experiences in which the nervous system lost the sense of association and actually dissociated. It is like all over the place, which means disembodied. The system still strives for wanting to connect with itself. So it is not interpreted that we want to have a good experience. It is actually that the nervous system has no other choice than returning to its natural state of oneness. And that can only be experienced by the body. It cannot be experienced by consciousness, because consciousness doesn't experience anything. Consciousness is not experienced. It notices experiences, but it itself is not an experience, neither does it know how to experience. So we have to make that clear, that otherwise we end up in a personal perspective, and the danger is then when we talk about non-duality, we subtly create a very refined sense of duality. If we speak about, I want happiness, I don't want to be unhappy, and we don't see that all this doesn't belong to you. It belongs to this organism. And that we cannot change. So inevitably we cannot get rid of the human experience. Identification means the capacity to identify. What is identifying is, I can identify an experience through a focus of my attention. If I don't focus on you, I will hardly be able to identify you as separate from the rest of experience. So identification is a product of a focus. Attention is, if you would like, the spotlight of awareness. So awareness is not moving, and when awareness becomes attention, it enables to identify an object. So through that focus, just by watching, but just by paying attention at you in a certain way, like with a narrow focus, there is identification. It's not that it is something to be avoided, it is inevitable, it happens naturally. So identification means the capacity to identify. So the question is it possible for example, you and me, or the body over there and the body over here, to meet each other so completely that there is no need to focus. Yeah, like this. So that the focus can relax. You saw, as we're sitting here, you see, your focus relaxes a little bit. It just remains, I would say, loose. We pay attention. There's a little bit of attention on consciousness as the background. But at the same time, if the focus is not directed by any willpower, it is also including this body and at the same time the body over there. And in that presence, in this relaxed focus kind of presence, there is no identification, because I cannot identify you. There's only recognition of something happening over there and something happening here, not finding the boundary, because I don't know where you end, where do I begin. So we meet, or there's a meeting, without identification. Identification means I need to focus. The focus allows me to identify myself as an observer, you as an object being observed, and that process of observing is identification. What it is that habitually our focus is on what we think. It's a focus. So if we have never learned anything, like if you speak with me, okay, and normally we would contact each other. Like that's the normal human functioning. That when we meet, hello, my name is, and my name is this, and then we start to telling us our stories. What it actually is that we're trying to connect with each other. I call it a clumsy reach. So our system tries to connect with your system through the story. So when I tell you my story, where will your attention be? Where do I draw your attention? To the story. Fantastic. So you give my story attention. Can you meet me? Or can you only meet my story? Eventually, you meet my story. Same vice versa. So we're actually not identified with the story, but we're constantly drawing our attention to the stories because we have not learned to connect in a different way. That produces an inner feeling of giving our stories and what we think and the pictures so much attention. If we wouldn't give so much attention to this, there would be no identification. Because without a narrow focus, to go back, you wouldn't be able to identify. You wouldn't even be able to identify your thinking without looking at your thinking. So just have a moment. If you don't look at your thinking, if there's no focusing on thinking, where's the thinking? There's no thinking. So in order to identify thinking as something is happening, you have to focus on it. So the moment you're focusing on the thinking, you're producing the thinking. I mean, even the entire quantum physics say so. They say that the moment of observing an object, you create the object. So there is not such a thing as an independent stream of thinking. It comes into existence through a habit to focus on it. So if we stop focusing the way we all learned it, like willpower, giving it direction, you have to be one-pointed, and all the rest of it, which is an act of will, the focus will naturally return to its natural ease. And in this, the thinking becomes ease, there's no trouble, whatever you experience is not troubling you, it can be here. So then all of life is just can be here. The suffering begins when my system tries to connect with you, and I constantly fail because I cannot connect with you. And that causes frustration, upset, frustration, sadness. It's like we hang out together and why is there no connection? It's like in most long-term relationships you have that feeling. You have spent 20 years with your wife and still you have the feeling there's almost no connection. You know that feeling. It's like, especially when we are amongst people that we actually like very much and that we are concerned about. So that is exactly where the suffering begins. It is that we have never learned to connect with the disconnection. We try to solve the disconnection, and that is exactly where the suffering begins. If we both sit with each other and the nervous system feels received, just the way we are, then there's connection. So as long as this mechanism of subtly feeling not being fully received, rejected, it will activate the system, and that feels like a sense of me, that feels like an I. It only feels like an I, but there is no I. But it feels very much like an I. It feels like an I over there, meeting an I over here, and that I rejects a little bit. So we have to make clear that there is not such a thing that an I, but it is like a generated feeling in the system. It's like an activation. Like if you're stressed, your feeling of I is much higher than when your system is relaxed. Is that so? So it feels like, so we're talking about certain activities in the system that feel as if there would be an I. And that activity belongs to the nervous system, to the tissue, to the muscles. And most of us, we're not aware of this. We don't see it. We're gaining only the surface, the fruits, but we don't see the activity. We have to again return to who or what is experiencing disconnection. And as we look at it totally precisely, it is not me, it is not consciousness, that sense of disconnection. And it's a word, it's a label that we're using, okay? It is like, I couldn't even say what it is. It feels like wow or ow. It's like there's a residue of not, there's something there that could happen. It's like a potential. When it's not connected, it feels like it's potentially there, but the potential is not coming reality. So that is noticed. It is not noticed by me. It is like a kind of cellular information. So is it possible to receive that cellular information without interpreting it with the mind? Which is very difficult because the mind would label it disconnection. So we're using a languaging thing here, and languaging is extremely tricky at this point because it can be creating a kind of psychological world which it is not. So can this feeling of, that embodied feeling of disconnection, of not being fully one, which every cell somehow feels, can this be held by consciousness without being interpreted, possibly not even without being named, but more being received? Because, as I said, the feeling of disconnection comes from the nervous system trying to reach out and at the same time expecting not to be received. And as long as we can receive, if we're not able to receive, not even the information of disconnection, the system will try to make it happen, and it becomes active. Then it feels like I am trying to connect with you, you trying to connect with me, and that will end up in frustration, because we can't. It's simply not possible as long as the system has a feeling of not being received. And that is so painful that for most of us, to touch that place in the system is literally causing panic, because our nervous system needs it. If I don't feel received, it activates pure sheer panic in the system. It's like I have done everything possible and still we don't connect. So it is not so much about activity, it is more about receiving the subtle informations that our body gives us all the time, because there's a whole lot of information happening right now. And we have never learned to listen to that language. We haven't learned the language of our nervous system. We have interpreted the language of our bodies, like this whole medical stuff. That's not what I'm talking about. There's a language of the nervous system, and somehow maybe I'm just curious, because I've noticed when I tune in very exquisitely, delicately into that information, it reveals subtleties to the system that I would say humanity has not seen yet. It's like we're touching the collective unconscious in the human race that has caused so much trouble, and no teaching so far has solved this. So we have to make clear that to the degree we're living as a human species, nothing has solved that level. We still do not feel safe with each other. So it's quite interesting. So it's not about, to finalize or to summarize it, it's not about trying to connect, it's actually receiving the degree of disconnection, so that the system can connect with its own degree of disconnection. It is the nervous system trying to complete itself. It tries to find back to its... eventually it is that neuronal connections try to either find themselves again, they've tried to move from dissociation to association, or, and I would say, when I'm looking at to how it is that almost, I don't know if any human being ever had the full experience of being completely received. Because there's some biological thing going on. Like I said, in most wombs of the mom, the egg and the first cell division was experienced as an antibody and is automatically rejected by the body. And that's an information. So if you look at science and what the neurologists found out, that cells evolve and cells connect in particular environments. So the environmental impact on the neuronal functioning of this organism is tremendously important. When we get back to the basics, all we're dealing with is there's awareness here, and in that awareness, this nervous system, I call it the human experience, shows up. And that nervous system seems to look for completion. It wants to complete with itself. And how it is doing? Through reaching out, trying to complete itself through the outside. Even a teaching is the outside. For the perspective of consciousness, a teaching is external. So it reaches out, at the same time it feels it is expecting to be rejected, and it loops like a hamster in the wheel around its own stuff until it is met. So the moment we meet it and give it space, that vicious circle of trying to complete itself and at the same time expecting that it is not going to work can finally come to rest. And that is stress. So a lot of that stress is actually coming from there.